welcome. I'd like to welcome you all to TRIDEC's 53rd annual meeting, and I'm Mike Cluse. For those of you who don't know me, it's been my pleasure to serve as TRIDEC's chairman of the board for the past 2.5 years. You know, for the past 53 years now, TRIDEC, its member investors, and our economic development partners have worked together to strengthen the economic vitality of the Tri-Cities region, while at the same time retain the quality of life that we all enjoy. And without our dedicated members, our regional economy would not be as strong as it is today. So I want to thank you all for your support. So at this time, Carl Adrian, who's our CEO, will join me as we recognize our outgoing board members who've served us so well over the past several years. So first of all, Scott Sachs, who is president of Washington Closure Hanford. He served on the board for the past 2 years. Scott? Thanks, Scott. Steve Young, who's the mayor of the city of Kennewick. He served as the council's rep to the board for 6 years. Steve, thank you. You know, at this time, I'd also like to recognize Rand Wortman, who you all know will retire in May as CEO of Catholic Medical Center. And Rand has served Catholic and the community very well for the past 15 years. And for 6 of those years, he was a TRIDEC board member. That was from 2005 to 2010. So, Rand, we extend our congratulations to you upon your retirement. Wish you well. And let's all give Rand a round of applause. I know Rand's here. Rand, thank you. And be careful with that Corvette. Okay. Now to introduce our 2016 board members. And I'd ask you all to stand as your name is called and remain standing, and we'll give you a round of applause at the end. So, serving on the executive committee, Jim Sanders, who's the retired manager of Benton PUD. Barbara Johnson, general manager of Columbia Center Mall. Greg McConnell, publisher of the Tri-City Herald. Brad Fisher, senior vice president and branch director of RBC Wealth Management. Fran Forget, partner, Reddick, Forget, Iller, Adamson. Steve Ashby, the laboratory director of Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Eric Peterson, president and CEO of Community First Bank. Eric Marcelli, vice president of operations, Cascade Natural Gas. Michelle MacArthur, vice president, global operations and supply chain, ConAgra Foods, Lamb Weston. Jean Rickman, Commissioner, Port of Pasco. Sandra Kent, Councilwoman, City of Richland. Brad Peck, Commissioner, Franklin County. Craig Walker, who is TRIDEC's legal counsel and also partner of Walker, Hay, Meehan, and Eisinger. Dave Zabel, manager of City of Pasco. Marie Mosley, manager of City of Kennewick. City Reentz, manager of City of Richland. Of course, Carl Adrian is our president and CEO. And these individuals are joined by our board members, Deborah Barnard, co-owner Barnard Griffin Winery. Don Barnes, commissioner of the Port of Kennewick. Chad Bartram, general manager of Benton PUD. Jim Beaver, commissioner from Benton County. Ken Brutzman, vice president, Brutzman's Office Solutions. Stacy Charbonneau, manager of DOERL. John Chucci, president and CEO, CH2M Hill, Plateau Remediation Company. Roberta Gabbard, vice president, Commercial Loan Center and manager, Banner Bank. Mike Garrison, councilman, City of Pasco. Brent Jerry, mayor of the City of West Richland. Doc Hastings, retired congressman. Melanie Hofer, General Manager and owner, Tri-Cities Journal of Business and Senior Times. Bill Johnson, President and General Manager of Mission Support Alliance. Greg Jones, Councilman, City of Kennewick. Todd Jones, President, Agra Northwest. Roy Keck, Commissioner, Port of Benton. Ron Land, Senior Vice President, Fuel Business Unit, Arriva. Jennifer Lency, CPA and Engagement Director, Clifton Larson Allen CPAs. Mark Lindholm, President, Washington River Protection Solutions. Glenn Marshall, CEO, Trios Health. Brandon Mayfield, General Manager, Shervinell Construction. Peggy McCullough, WTP Project Director, Bechtel National. Keith Moo Young, Chancellor, WSU Tri-Cities. Ian Napier, General Manager, Red Lion Hotels. Michael Pettyjohn, Vice President, Private Banking Manager, Baker Boyer Bank. Mark Redeman, CEO, Energy Northwest. Kevin Smith, Manager of DOE ORP, Office of River Protection. And Roger Snyder, Manager of DOE's Pacific Northwest Site Office. Chris Watkins, President and CEO of Visit Tri-Cities. Jeff Wolfenden, Program Manager, Lockheed Martin. We want to thank all of our board members for their willingness to serve, and we certainly appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you all. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our President and CEO, Carl Adrian, who's going to give us a brief recap of 2015, which really was a stellar year for TRIDEC. Carl?
Good afternoon. Let me also say thank you for coming. Thank you to our sponsors, and thank you to our members for continuing to support TRIDEC. I think most of you are here today to really hear our guest speaker, Ted Baseler, and not me, so I'm going to be brief with my remarks this afternoon. But as Mike pointed out, 2015 was an incredibly important year for TRIDEC and the Tri-City community. Several projects which we'd worked on for a number of years actually came to a successful conclusion. Late in the year, AutoZone completed a purchase of a 60-acre site in Pasco for the location of a Pacific Northwest distribution center. When complete, the project will consist of nearly 450,000 square feet with room to expand and about over 200 new employees. I understand that was the largest building permit issued in Pasco in 2015. We actually began work with the consultants J.M. Mullis and Associates, who represented AutoZone in this process back in September of 2014. The consultants evaluated sites in Yakima, Grandview, Sunnyside, several in the Tri-Cities, Hermiston, Boardman, and Pendleton. After a dozen site visits and countless phone calls and just even 500 emails just in my folder, they made the final decision to locate the facility in Pasco. You know, I often say economic development is everybody's business, but I will tell you that we found out after they made the decision that before making the decision, the CEO of AutoZone and an executive team flew in unannounced, unbeknownst to anybody in the community, to look over the community, to feel comfortable about making the investment here and looking at the site. So again, it's everybody's business, and I hate to think about what would have happened if something would have went wrong during that very brief site visit. So again, it's important for all of us to recognize that. My hat's off to Mayor Matt Watkins and City Manager Dave Zabel for the work they put in on this project, but also Susan St. Germain with the Washington State Department of Commerce, because the lead originally originated with the state. Some of you have heard me say we kiss a lot of frogs in this business. As it turns out, AutoZone was a prince. But I look at our active list of projects, or frogs, if you want to put it that way, and it represents over $500 million in new capital investment and well over 500 new jobs for the community. On September 30th of last year, after a long 4+ years, the Department of Energy transferred 1,641 acres to TRIDEC for economic development. In January of this year, Good to our promise, we actually transferred 1,341 acres to the City of Richland and the Port of Benton for economic development purposes, and we're now working on disposing of the balance of the property. While TRIDEC, the Port, the City, and Benton County attended countless meetings, reviewed document after document, this historic transfer could not really have occurred when it did without the then Congressman Doc Hastings and Senators Murray and Cantwell. It really did take an act of Congress to get this land transferred, and that's what happened. Speaking of Congress, 2015 was another challenging year for PNNL and Hanford budgets. TRIDEC supported a variety of PNNL programs, including climate and environmental sciences, buildings technology, energy storage, and grid modernization, as well as non-proliferation. Our annual congressional letter of request for FY16 included an ask of $119.5 million in additional funding for Hanford cleanup. The spending bill passed by Congress included $79 million over the president's budget. It takes a village, and you know, I've been very careful to say we're not the only ones that do work with the congressional staff and work with our members to hopefully get additional funding for Hanford cleanup. But we have to say thank you to Senators Murray and Cantwell and Congressman Newhouse for their efforts in Congress to bring that funding to the Tri-Cities and to Hanford cleanup. After consciously focusing our business retention and expansion program on the food and beverage industry, we launched last year our first ever food and beverage expo. We call it Fabrio Expo. Food and Beverage Retention and Expansion Opportunities is the acronym. And look for a bigger and better Fabrio Expo in June of 2016. The effort to establish the Mid-Columbia as a gateway to the Pacific Rim for food and beverage companies resulted in us signing an MOU with the Hong Kong Trade Development Council late last summer, and then in the fall, a similar signing with the government of Inner Mongolia. Members will be, I want to say members are going to be receiving an annual report in the mail in the next few weeks, so that will kind of also review some of the comments I've just made. I'm going to close by reminding you that TRIDEC is really the only local organization that focuses on the economic growth of the entire community. We're also the only organization that has a consistent track record in successfully lobbying for federal dollars for PNNL and Hanford. And finally, the only organization that regularly provides leadership on broad issues that really have broad community issues that affect our future. Mike recognized the board and outgoing members, but TRIDEC has several committees attended by a number of volunteers. There are from member companies. There are too many volunteers to recognize here, but I did want to thank just a couple people. First, Rick Miller, who chairs our Agribusiness Committee, and Sean Murrow, who's really kept that committee focused on important issues affecting agriculture. Shay Meehan, who's recently assumed the chairmanship of our Commerce and Industry Committee. Don Boucher, who, in my opinion, has a thankless job of serving on the Hanford Advisory Committee on behalf of TRIDEC. And then also, and I know he's not here today, but Brad Fisher, who's been chair of our membership committee. Attracting new members to TRIDEC has been a top priority this year and was last year, and thanks to Brad and others for their help. And again, thank you to our members. And if you're here and you're not a member and you want to know more about membership, I'm sure any of us could help you with that today. At this time, I'd like to recognize TRIDEC staff. It's a relatively small group that have a huge impact in the Tri-Cities. They're in the trenches every day in and day out, and are incredibly committed to making the Tri-Cities a better place. And so if you all would stand as I call your name. Gary Peterson, our Vice President of Hanford Programs. I know Gary's back there. Gary White, our Director of Business Retention and Expansion. Kayla Pratt, our Membership Director and Communications Director, and Kayla's currently on maternity leave, and we saw her brand new little girl in the office yesterday, so that was neat. Tracy Jow, Project Manager, but Project Manager is probably a misnomer. Tracy's the webmaster, the social media expert, the graphic design person, and a whole host of other things. Laura Warr, our Director of Finance, Sue Ann Burton, our Receptionist, and of course, Jane Foreman. Jane, stand up back there. Thank you all for everything you do for the community. Just a final comment. Some of you may know that TRIDEC provides some office space for some outside agencies, and Rebecca Weber, who is an international trade specialist with the Washington Department of Agriculture, actually has her office and base of operations at TRIDEC. And then also the Small Business Development Center, staffed by Bruce Davis, is located at TRIDEC, as is SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives. These two latter organizations really kind of fill a gap for us in dealing with entrepreneurs and small businesses on specialized needs. So we want to thank them for being in the TRIDEC office. Again, it's been a pleasure to serve with TRIDEC. We've had a great year. We're looking forward to a great 2016. With that, Mike, I'm going to ask you to come back up and introduce our guest speaker today. Thank you.
Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I think we all ought to give Carl a big round of applause for a stellar year. Carl bleeds Tri-Cities, and he puts a lot of time and effort, and you can see the results this year. And too often the boss kind of gets looked over in terms of recognition, but he does a tremendous job, and certainly I've enjoyed working with him over the past several years. Carl, thanks. Great job. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Ted Baseler, who is the president and CEO of Saint Michel Wine Estates. So his entire bio is in the program. I'll just highlight a few points. Ted is regarded as a leader in the U.S. wine industry, and he's dedicated his career to building Washington State into one of the top wine-producing regions in the world. As president and CEO of critically acclaimed Saint Michel Wine Estates, where he's been an executive for more than 30 years, Ted is the architect of the company's expansion throughout Washington, as well as winery acquisitions in California and Oregon, and the development of an imported wines portfolio, which includes prestige wineries from Italy, Spain, Chile, France, and New Zealand. And throughout his career, he's been equally committed to community service. He's held board positions for the Washington Roundtable, which is where I got to know Ted and was able to work with him when I was a member of the Roundtable. Also challenged Seattle, the Washington State Wine Commission, Washington Wine Institute, and Seattle Children's Hospital. So really committed to the community as much as to his own profession. And he's one of Washington's leading higher education advocates. Ted's been appointed by the governor to serve on the Washington State University Board of Regents, where he's actually served since 2006, including a year as its chair. And most recently, he's led the campaign to build a world-class enology and viticulture institution at WSU, including raising $23 million in private and government support. And I know he played a critical role in the siting of the Wine Science Center on the WSU Tri-City campus. Ted also founded Saint Michel's scholarship program, which benefits students in need and has granted more than $3 million in scholarships in the recent years. So please help me join in welcoming Ted Baseler.
Good afternoon. Well, thank you for the invitation to speak today, and I want to talk about my favorite topic, which is Washington State wine. It's an economic engine for Washington State, and the future is very bright. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about history, our business philosophy, and then a few projections about the future of the wine industry in Washington, which indeed is very exciting. So our business approach is a little different than other people in the wine industry. When you look at the world of wine, it's very fragmented. There are 2.2 million wineries in the world. About 10% are commercially viable, but there are relatively few high-quality large wine companies. And it's quite fascinating when you look at, if you say 2 million cases, predominantly premium price, which means over $9 a bottle, there are only 8 in the world. And I'm happy to say we have the first position in those top 8. As we developed the company, we would observe these other large companies, and as they grew, they lowered prices and they dumbed down their products. Then they would go out and make trophy acquisitions at very high multiples of wineries, and then they would regret the investment they made in these wineries, and as a consequence, they would sell off the vineyard, sell off the winery, they would get rid of the winemaking team and make it in some big manufacturing plant. And we would see that, and it would be this failure after failure. We said, there's got to be a better way. So we have developed an approach that I call the string of pearls, that each one of these wineries has its own identity. It has its own legacy, its own winemaking staff, its own building, it has its own estate vineyard, and its own reputation. And we let them run pretty much autonomously. Now, we do get some synergies. So the string and the string of the pearls is essentially the back of the house. So it's HR, finance, sales, all that. We get synergies through the organization. But the properties have winemakers that have this incredible passion to make their property the best it can be. And so far, it's worked out very well. I'm going to show you a brief movie here that I call Pioneers to Pearls.
Back before there were rolling hills covered in beautiful vines, this was a harsh place. It had all the right elements: soil, sun, water. Eastern Washington was yet undiscovered, raw, but the pioneers saw opportunity and had a vision. One man in particular had a crazy idea, or some might call it courage. He planted grapes in the Yakima Valley and began to cultivate a wine industry in Washington. Where? That's right, Washington. Risky? Well, that's what true pioneers do. They forged ahead with hard work, dedication, optimism, combining their own knowledge and passion with the expertise of others. It led to the first vintage. What was once a wild idea would quickly become the Washington wine industry. And out of that pioneering spirit emerged a leader, Saint Michel. A collection of leading wineries with rich histories and accolades would join the Saint Michel family. At the same time, we forged partnerships across borders and continents. With a vision to take on the world. A string of pearls that shines individually and collectively. Classic. Respected. Regal. Unique. Global brands and exclusive wines. That's Saint Michel Wine Estate.
So I can't remember exactly when we got that #1 wine in the world, but it was November 16th at 7:14 a.m. in the morning. I got the call that we got the #1 wine in the world. That was a great milestone, not just for our company, but more importantly for Washington, and remains the only #1 rating for a Pacific Northwest winery so far. I know there'll be many more in the future. It's kind of interesting when you think about the history of Washington, and I'm just going to go back to 1967. And at that time, there were 7 wineries in Washington state. About 640,000 cases of wine were sold. 88% was fortified dessert wine, also known as Skid Row wine, and fruit wine. Only 12%, about 70,000 cases, was actually varietal or vinifera style wine. So we've really come a long ways, and some of these numbers I'm going to show you are even more exciting. So Washington is leading in growth over California. California up about 2%. You can see that Washington has been up about 9%. And imports have actually declined slightly in the last few years. The top 4 major varieties account for over 50%, about 50% of Washington, and you can see that we actually are leading in each one of these important categories of Chardonnay, Cabernet, and even in Merlot, which is declining thanks to that terrible movie Sideways. Never watch that movie, it's awful. But Washington Merlot continues to grow, which is very positive. And then people talk about all these great regions of the world and how well they do in the U.S. market. The fact is that Washington sells more wine in the U.S. than New Zealand, France, Chile, and Oregon. And only Italy and Australia are ahead of us in sales in the U.S. and, of course, California. Here's another important factor, and while Washington doesn't have the highest priced wines in the world, when you look at it from a supermarket standpoint, actually Washington wines sell for almost $10 versus $6.50 for California, and that's really important to retailers because they want higher priced wines. And Washington also, wines respond well to promotion. Looking at percent of 90-plus scores, and unfortunately this just changed. Washington has led the world in percentage of wines tasted with 90-plus scores, and Oregon just snuck in front of us just last year. And then you look at from a price standpoint, the average 90-plus rated wine of Washington is $47, so it's the lowest price of the major regions. So when you think about Washington wines, they're growing faster than the category. We sell more bottles than other leading regions. We attract more premium adult consumers, and we have superior quality. It's a winning combination and leads to some great optimism. Now I want to show you this chart just briefly to show you how we do in these major varieties. So 8% of all premium wine sold in the U.S. is Washington. That used to be 1%. If you look at by variety, you see that 10.6% of Cabernet sold is from Washington. So it's an index of about 133. Merlot, 19% is Washington, which is very, very good. Syrah and Shiraz, 11.2%, so we're stronger in the index, although that's a very weak category right now, as you can see, off 9%. Other red blends, so that's just a blend of varietal wines. We're at 6.2, so we're under-indexed. And then Riesling, 51.4% of all Riesling sold in the United States in the premium category is from Washington State. That means we only have 49% of the way to go. Chardonnay, 10.7, so we do very well in that category. And then a little weak in Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio. So it's kind of interesting to see where the strengths of Washington have been and what we're projecting for the future. So we've had some great acclaim in the last year. These are just a few of the items. Some great ratings from the Wine Advocate, the Wine Spectator. We had a Wall Street Journal reporter come through the winery last summer at Chateau Ste. Michelle in Woodinville, and it was a little frightening because she wanted to know everything about our guest services and the tour guides. She wanted their salaries, she wanted their benefits, she was asking all these Wall Street Journal questions, and I thought this could be dangerous. And she wrote this story, which was the inside of a winery tasting room, and I thought that's an ominous headline, and it turned out to be the greatest testimonial why you want to visit the winery that I've ever seen. So once again, you got to give the journalists what they want so they write good stories and you cooperate. I'm going to get into the Wine Science Center momentarily, but a great article in the Seattle Times. And Chateau Ste. Michelle was named Winery of the Year by Wine and Spirits magazine for the 20th time, the most of any winery in the U.S. Forbes magazine writing about the rise of Washington wines and how it's gone from 20 to 850 wineries, over a billion in revenues. There's a lot of talk about millennials, and people are very concerned that millennials are not wine consumers. And I have to say, having a millennial daughter, I can tell you that's not true. And in fact, what we're seeing with millennials is they have craft spirits, craft beer, import beer, cider, and wine. And a lot of baby boomers in their early 20s were not drinking any wine. And if they were, it was Blue Nun and Riuniti and bad wine. So what we're seeing is this transition where millennials are having quality wine in their repertoire set. And as they get older, I project that they will significantly increase their wine consumption. And the trends actually look better than Generation X and baby boomers. So we're pro-millennials. Here's a great note from a professor at UC Davis, which, by the way, was very cooperative in building the Wine Science Center. And he said, I would say one of the biggest threats that California Cabernet probably has is from Washington. I don't think it takes American consumers much to translate from California to Washington. And I have to say that there are many California wineries, high quality, coming to Washington State. And we have a big tent here, and we welcome them. And it's very exciting to see. Some of them have told me personally that you can't make a quality bottle of wine in Napa under $75, but you can in Washington. So that really is a good trend, and I think it validates everything that's happening in our great state. Tourism. It's a good industry now. It's going to be a great industry in the future. So in California, they get 20 million wine tourists a year. We don't do 5% of that. 20 million a year, spending $2 billion on wine tourism. That's what we have to look for in the future. And recently, speaking with an important wine critic, he told me, he says, you know, the wines in Washington are better than anywhere in the world. You just need something that is a trigger event where people find that out from a valid source. Looking at international growth, we're seeing excellent growth in Asia, Canada, the UK, Hong Kong, and we have a special relationship in Italy. So our wines are featured in Italian restaurants. Now this next chart is very exciting to me. When I started in the business, there were 2,000 acres of grapes, 20 wineries. Today, There are 900 wineries and about 60,000 acres of planted grapes. California has about 600,000. So we're about 10% of California. But most of California is not premium wine. And in fact, in the Central Valley, we heard that they're ripping out 35,000 acres of vines a year and plan for the next four or 5 years. So there'll be a tremendous reduction in wine grapes in the Central Valley. Now, that's not generally considered to be premium. So when you think about our comparison of what we have potential in this great state in eastern Washington for planting vineyards, we calculate that there could be 200,000 acres planted. And they're great places, sites, very good places. So if you look at how much we potentially could have, 200,000 versus about 175,000 existing premium acres in California. Now, let's not do this overnight. Let's gradually ramp up over 20 years. But I would say in 20 years, Washington could have more premium vineyards than California. Very exciting milestone. Now, I was talking about the trigger event. We have a little winery in Napa Valley called Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. And 40 years ago this year, a British wine merchant who had a wine shop in Paris decided that he was going to have a grand tasting, and he brought Napa wines, brown bags, with these wine critics in Paris. And they blind tasted the best Burgundies, white Burgundies, and the best of Bordeaux against these Napa Valley wines. There just happened to be a Time magazine reporter sitting in there who just came to get some free wine, and he chronicled this event where, shocking to everyone in the world, because French wines were here and everybody else was down here, the critics, the French critics in Paris, selected the Napa Red, which was Stag's Leap #1, and the Napa Chardonnay #1 in the white category, beating the French. And of course, they were disgusted, and Stephen Spurrier is no longer welcome in the country of France for obvious reasons. But we need this trigger event. We need something to show the greatness of Washington wines. So then, thinking of the future and really putting us in a place to be competitive around the world, there is no great region that doesn't have a great wine science center or institute committed to research and education. And now we have this at WSU Tri-Cities. We're very excited. This is absolutely state-of-the-art. There is nothing more technologically advanced in the world than the WSU Wine Science Center. And I would also add that the people at UC Davis were phenomenally collaborative and gave us all the do's and don'ts, which is something you generally don't see in academia. But they were wonderful, and we really appreciate all their good guidance and counsel on this. This is going to make a huge difference. It's really important to have research to prevent potential future calamities in the vineyards. It's important to hire and train highly educated leaders in winemaking and viticulture. And I have to say, as we have hired a number of master's candidates to our company from the WSU viticulture program, they're light years ahead of what we would get 10, 15 years ago. And it's really exciting for our economy and for jobs in Washington State. So in summary, the future of Washington wines is very bright. The millennials are going to get old and drink more wine. And the economic opportunities are fantastic. So thank you very much. Questions? I'd be happy to answer a few questions if anybody has any. Okay, thank you.
Ted, thanks. Very exciting indeed. I know I drank my share of Blue Nun and Rio Niti. I hadn't heard those words in a long time. Tells you how old I am. Anyway, so before everybody leaves, we're going to have we have a few door prizes here to raffle off. Hopefully, you left your business card in the container. Okay, Roy Keck. Roy. So, this is the round of golf at Canyon Lakes. Roy, I know, okay, you are here. I saw you earlier. Brian Ross from Conover Insurance with a WSU wine gift basket. What's that? Okay. John Neal, Fields of Grace. John, you here? Got to be here. There he is. Okay. And this is another round of golf at Canyon Lakes. This is donated by Melanie Hoffer. Thank you. Terry Walsh, Executive Director, Employee and Community Relations, Kennewick. Terry? And, okay. Is that it? I think that's it. Okay. So again, thank you all for coming, and I would like to thank our sponsors, Garlic Enterprises. George, thank you. RBC Wealth Management. I know Brad's not here, but we thank him profusely. X-Pro I Audiovisual Rental, and Benton PUD. And really, thanks to all of you, our members, who support everything we do at TRIDEC. We couldn't be successful. We couldn't have the year that we had this past year without your hearty support. We thank you for all of that. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.